Welcome to the Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinar series. I'm Kate Trans, and today we have invited Matt Ignacio to speak on group counseling. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, or ATTC. We are one of 4 national focus centers serving the ATTC network, shown in this slide. The network also includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. To learn more, please visit our website. This series is designed to be a broad overview to assist in preparing for written alcohol and drug certification examinations, to enhance existing knowledge, and to improve overall competence and treatment outcomes. Please be aware that this series is not meant to stand alone, and previous education and training is necessary in order to pass alcohol and drug certification exams. We recommend that if you are preparing for an exam, that you seek additional preparatory help and let this course be one of many tools you use to prepare. Our next webinar in this series is scheduled for Wednesday, August 20, when Beth Boyd will be presenting Basic Counseling Skills. We also offer the American Indian and Alaska Native Behavioral Health webinar series, and we'll welcome our own Sean Bear on August 6th. Actually, I know that has just changed. We are now going to be having Dr. Clyde McCoy joining us and speaking on The Real All-American. For more information on our webinar series, you can contact me at the email address or phone number provided on this slide. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEHs for a $15 fee. The CEH request form is available for download in the Files pod on the webinar screen, and I will also be sending this form out in a follow-up email to all who attended. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our GPRA evaluation. GPRA stands for the Government Performance and Results Act, and SAMHSA asks us to evaluate our events in order to comply with this act and provide improved performance assessment and accountability. This survey asks us about your satisfaction with the event and will take less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our program. If you've never used the Adobe Connect system before, you may view the presentation in full screen mode by clicking on the full screen button at the top right corner of the presentation pod, which looks like 4 arrows pointing outward. To return to the regular view, click the button again. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar. Please use the Q&A pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. We would also like you to be aware that this webinar records participant attention time. If you minimize the webinar or are working in another window, the system will record your participation as inactive, which may be reflected in the number of CEHs received. Today's speaker is Matt Ignacio. Mr. Ignacio most recently worked for the National Native American AIDS Prevention Center and also had worked for the Michael Palm Center for AIDS Care and Support at Gay Men's Health Crisis. The Crisis Center was the world's first and largest AIDS service organization located in New York City, and his responsibilities there included providing harm reduction-based alcohol and drug counseling, providing individual level psychotherapy for HIV positive clients, and facilitating psychoeducational and supportive group counseling. So we thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to have him share from his experience, and we want to welcome him today to speak on group counseling. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ignacio.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say good morning or good afternoon. My name is Matt Ignacio, as Kate mentioned, and I'm from the Tohono Nation, which is a tribal nation located in southern Arizona. Um, and I just wanted to give a quick overview of what we will be talking about in the next, in the time that you have taken out of your busy schedules to be with me for. And that's to look at group counseling, a really wide overview of group counseling. And I divided the presentation up into 2 parts. Part 1 is really sort of the how-to. And for most of you all, maybe this might be new information or review, we're just going to kind of get on the same page around looking at the different types of groups that we work with and work for, and the types of membership that we encounter in group work, as well as implementation and facilitation skills necessary. And then we're going to shift gears really during part 2 and look at what does group work look like with Native clients. I don't, in that in that section, we'll look at various communication styles and the differences when working with Native clients, taking into account some cultural considerations, and really kind of looking at some engagement and retention strategies when working with Native clients. Um, I want to just also say that I realize that you all are the experts in the communities in which you work and all the great work that you're doing. And I'm merely here presenting a flavor or a lens to which to continue the work that you all are doing. So again, this is an overview. It's a broad stroke of looking at group work with Native folks. And I always like to hear about or down the road maybe learn of innovative ways that you've learned to take and do group work with Native clients, because I think the how-to is sort of maybe, if I may say, the easier part. Learning how to do group work is, you can learn that through formal education. It's really sort of adapting what you've learned and working with populations that might be different from your own. And that's the perspective that I'm bringing today. So thank you again for taking time out of your schedules to be with me. All right, let's get started. Okay, so looking at the how-to of group work. I should also add that there'll be a period between part one and part two where we'll take a break for questions. Um, so please, if at any point during this presentation you have any questions, feel free to just go ahead and type those in the chat box, and then we'll get to those midway through. Questions, comments, feedback, etc. All welcome. The groups and the various types of groups. So the first off is psychoeducational. Again, that's to um, expand client awareness of behaviors and consequences, and to assist motivating the client. We also look at skills development groups, and the purpose is to cultivate skills within people and helping them achieve and maintain abstinence. And that can operate from a cognitive behavioral orientation. Let's take a quick look at cognitive and behavioral groups, which is where the leader focuses on providing a structured environment. All right, so working with group members to examine behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs that can lead to maladaptive behaviors such as drug use, um, uh, so overeating, looking at debtors anonymous. I'm thinking of debtors anonymous. So looking at spending money and finances, or sexual addiction, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last sort of general type of group we're referring to today is looking at support groups, and that really has an origin in the self-help tradition. Um, can offer social support, and especially useful for apprehensive clients. Can offer a safe environment or a safe holding space, and certainly help destigmatize a problem or an activity someone's going through in their life. By that I mean sort of normalizing that we all have challenges, and here's a safe place where you can go and reflect and explore what it's like to go through challenges in life. With regard to group membership, certainly we can either have fixed or revolving membership, and that's often referred to as open or closed groups. An open format certainly allows new members to enter group when ready. Closed format, group begins and ends with the same membership. So if we're going for an ongoing open format, membership, people can sort of come in, come out. There may not be an official beginning and end point of when that group runs. For closed format, let's say it's a 12-week group, and for the first, I don't know, 2 or 3, up until the third group, then it becomes a closed group. So you might have members trickling in the first couple sessions, but then after a designated point, it becomes a closed group. And ideally, at the end of 12 weeks, you'll have the same members that began at the start of the group. And really kind of breaking down what some of the pros and cons might be. You can review this slide. For example, a sort of a plus of having an open group is, you get dynamics with new members, but that can also be a con when you're having an open group of people filtering in and out. Kind of can break the dynamics of group cohesion. Looking at closed group, some of the pros of a closed group is that the learning builds on previous meetings. So within a 12-week span, or however long your group is running for, each session can build upon the last. A downside of that is that if a client is ready to enter group work, they'll have to wait till the end of the 12 weeks or however long the group is running for before they can enter, and that can derail one's motivation or one's readiness, um, et cetera, et cetera. So before placing a client in a particular group, we all as providers must consider the client's readiness, the client's characteristics, needs, and preference, and understand that clients may need to move to different groups as they progress through treatment, as they encounter setbacks, and become more or less committed to addressing problematic behavior. And in this particular case, we're referring to sobriety or wellness or addressing their addictions or other problematic behaviors. Group membership may also include folks who want to be there and folks who, for lack of a better phrase, are forced to be there, which is otherwise known as voluntary or involuntary membership. Involuntary individuals who are doing group work um, might feel or be coerced into group involvement, um, may have an initial resistance to even being there. But we can see through research and through the literature that they may experience better outcomes overall. The reason why folks may be involuntary members of group work is because of legal obligations, family pressure, um, external motivating factors certainly lead the client to resisting desire, and they may discontinue before reaching goal. However, we know that self-motivation to change certainly can inspire other group members and positively impact the group culture and norms. And by that I mean, if someone doesn't want to be there and they stick with it for one more session, they come back for just one more session, and they see that their peers or the other group members are positively benefiting from the work, they may be inspired to stick around and continue and hang in there. And I think that in and of itself is um, creating positive change for the individual. In looking at voluntary members, voluntary group members often can assist in providing motivation, particularly for those who may be unclear if this is a good fit for them or sort of maybe just considering changing but haven't really taken any other real steps other than coming to group. And they can serve as effective mentors to other group members. Um, self-motivation to change can inspire group members and positively impact group culture and norms. Okay, so it's important to remember with regard to group membership that often clients indicate the primary mode of help is through mutual support. In other words, it's not the facilitator that is most important, but the mutual support within the group, the people like them, the people that they're sitting with, either across the circle or next to them. Um, and I think once you actually, as a facilitator, see that happening, at least that's for me, that's where I get the satisfaction of doing the work. It's like when you see group members talking to each other, supporting each other, challenging each other, um, and you see the difference that that can make. It's really a profound experience to be a witness to, and I think that's what makes group work a really fulfilling intervention. And I think all of us can relate to that concept. Whether it was in class or maybe you have social groups or book clubs or spiritual groups or um, you participate in a weight loss group. Yes, the content does help, as well as seeing the peers and other people in similar life situations. So those members who self-reported improvement were significantly more likely, or are significantly more likely to have felt accepted by the other members. And oftentimes they can make specific references to say, Kate, this another group member, Kate really helped me in this process. I could really identify with her story. Here's somebody from a similar background who's going through similar challenges, and if she can do it, I know I can do it too. That's an example of some of the feedback that we hear. And some people might feel more committed to Kate than others, and I think that's just a common experience. And then, when we're looking at self-help groups versus mutual help, self-help implies the individual is in treatment. The individual in treatment is the main contributor to the change process. So I'm in this group because I want to seek help, maybe get answers, get clarification, change some aspect of my life, change some aspects of my behavior and choice and decision making. I'm the one that's there um, I'm doing this for me kind of, you might hear that sort of verbiage. Mutual help means that the individual also assumes partial responsibility for the recovery of their peers. So, um, folks who are in group take a responsibility, and here's an example. So, someone might feel like I've seen this happen where a particular group member is not being 100% accurate with their relapse or with their life situation, and a group member will call them out and say, I've been in your situation, and for me, this is how I handled it, or this was my experience. Maybe, that might be true for you. I mean, sort of calling attention to when people are not exactly being honest with their situation. And um, that can happen either in a confrontation or it can happen in just simple feedback. Either way, I think these are effective dynamics to be aware of when doing group work. And as facilitators, we are responsible for establishing parameters for the group and providing general behavioral expectations and really clarifying the purpose of the group, whether that's um, throughout, a reminder at the beginning at each start of each group, or having people signed consent forms or sort of I don't want to use the word contracts, but signing agreements that they are coming to this group with a clear understanding of what the expectations are. And, we're talking about working with Native folks, and this is something that I've done in my own practice, and that's instead of using the term group guidelines or rules or agreements, which can be a turnoff for some folks, I like to actually use the term group values. What are some, so in other words, when I'm in front of a room, people, what are some of the group values, or what are the values that we like to see or that we favor that can promote honest dialogue, as opposed to saying, what are some of the group guidelines or what are some group rules you guys want to have in place in order to have an effective discussion? I, I don't see it as sort of softening the language. I actually seeing it as more of a putting it in a cultural context. And and we all know that it's important to get elicit client feedback and suggestions for to create more buy-in, to create more ownership of the group work in itself. Okay, so when we're setting up the group values and we're implementing the group work, try not to make the group values too complicated or too restrictive. Um, Certainly, we want to focus on member safety. Actually, I should say also, the safety of the facilitators or co-facilitators or anyone else in the room for that matter. We certainly want to focus on honesty, um, respect for ourselves and other folks. um, perhaps you want to focus on punctuality, begin on time and end on time. Whenever I have done this in the past, I flat out say, I respect your time and your participation, and I will make every effort to end when I say we're going to end, whether that's in an hour and a half, or that's in 45 minutes, or what have you. And you know, I I hope that you will respect my time as well, and the other members' time as well, and be here at the start. Um, that's one way it can be phrased. And and if there's some confusion, or if there's maybe this is just standard practice or best practice, you know, as a as a way to clarify values and do a little values clarification, asking folks, what do I mean by establishing group parameters? Um, why do we even want this for our group at all? And sort of maybe having a guided discussion just to kind of get everybody on the same page. And certainly throughout the process, whether it's open or closed group, being open to amending, adding, adjusting groups as necessary, and if it is necessary to review at the beginning of each meeting of what the current group members, the values, group values are. And that actually might be standard if you're having an open group where folks are trickling in and out over a long period of time. You might need to uh, review them at each meeting. Okay, so these are some just basic examples of group values, and that's respecting confidentiality, which is very key when working with Native folks. I think, and so I don't. I say respect confidentiality, and it sounds like I'm saying that very lightly, but that's a key point to be mindful of, is that folks may not want to come back because somebody else is in the room that they know. So you might actually spend a great deal of time ensuring or describing what confidentiality practices, what confidentiality means, first off, for your organization. You might even go into detail for with HIPAA or the legal ramifications of breaches of confidentiality. That's up to you. But I listed respecting confidentiality as number one. We all try our best to honor that to the best of our ability so that we can build the trust with the folks that we are serving. Another example is the non-judgmental acceptance of others, our willingness and risk-taking and self-disclosure, um, participating by all group members, and that doesn't necessarily mean everybody has something to say at the group, but rather, active listening. Um, are they engaged even if they haven't made one comment in the last 45 minutes? Are they still engaged in listening and watching? That's participation. Um, Recognizing the available support in the group, respecting others, and willingness to accept feedback. These are just examples. Um, Something I've done in the past is provide an initial overview both individually and once folks are formed in the group. So again, just ensuring that clients will come to group with appropriate expectations, and we certainly do this in an effort to expect a greater deal of success, both of facilitating and of both participating. So these are some general, when we're talking about the implementation of groups, sort of stages, if you will, of group dynamics. The first being forming. And as the group is formed, there is usually apprehension on part of both the leader and the group members. Clients may question how they fit in. And this would be a great time for the group facilitator to draw out natural strengths clients may not realize they have. An example of that would be the way I was encouraged to do was to actually honor the fact that folks showed up. The fact that folks actually took a giant risk and took time out to come and be part of something that maybe this is the first time or exposure they've had to group work. The fact that they actually came is actually not a small success. It's a tremendous success, and that's a strength. And to name it and to say it and to honor that, um, remind folks that they do have strengths. And look, here is exactly one of them. You took a giant risk and a leap of faith, if you will, and came to be a part of something that you're not very familiar with. Excellent. Um, and that can happen in the initial stage of implementing groups. The next stage is referred to as storming, and this might be a comfortable place for clients to have conflict between group members. Um, we might ask folks to rephrase things in a respectful way. Client can actually be helpful in some ways, and it's just bringing the group members together. Conflict can indicate that an individual cares enough to be concerned. And if someone is questioning your leadership or your facilitation skills and wondering where the group is even going or why they're even there or are you good at your job, then you have moved on into the forming stage. You move beyond the forming stage, rather. And I think these are all very common experiences for group facilitators. And then we can move into a stage of norming, and this will happen after the storm. It's a period of evenness and calm. Feels pretty good. People are chugging along, moving forward, maybe asking themselves or giving feedback that this is a good place. They feel that this is a good place they can come each week. They look forward to coming. Those are typical things that you might experience. And then when you're really moving along, that's during the performing stage. Everyone knows their roles and rules of the group, and everyone is working towards achieving their goals and objectives for why they're even in the group to begin with. And the last stage is adjourning or termination of the group, and um, and I say that in two different breaths. One breath is when you actually end the group, when the group session is done. So whether that's 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour long, however, you end the group. You decide when the group ends, as opposed to when the clients start getting bored and you end it early. Um, And I also want to mention termination, or the ending of, if you have a closed group for 12 weeks and you know that there's a beginning, middle, and end. Um, that the best way to end a group is to plan for the finish at the very beginning, at session one. And I'll say that again: the best way to end a group is to plan for the finish at the beginning, and that's particular for native clients. Um, I say that because very often, in my experience, working with native communities across the United States, it's not uncommon for services to come and go. It's not uncommon. I had a coworker once who referred to them as flavor of the month programs. So you have a smoking cessation project for a year at a reservation or rural community, native community, local health center. It's really funded. It's funded for a year. People get motivated, get excited, participate, and then the funding runs out, the program ends, and no one ever hears about it again. That's not an uncommon experience. You have a really amazing HIV awareness campaign on a local reservation funded by the tribe at a local health facility. It's great. There's motivation. People get excited. People participate. People get tested. There's incentives to raising awareness, and then it ends after 12 months, and then there's nothing. There's no one knows what happens to the group. No one knows. Loses all motivation, loses steam, and that's the end of that. I think that's a very common experience. So when I say the best way to end a group is to plan for the finish at the beginning, is of particular importance for native clients, is because I think folks might have this expectancy that when something is really good, when something really good is happening in their lives, it's going to end abruptly with no explanation whatsoever. And people might feel disengaged or may not even want to participate or not even trust the process. Here's a way we can address that right at the get-go, is to bring that up front and say, we're here for the next 12 weeks. There is a beginning, a middle, and end. And start working towards that end process. And you might terminate um, halfway through. I think if you start, I think, I mean, the way I've learned is to start, 3/4 of the way to begin planning for the end. Um, But it really depends on the communities you're working with and their readiness. But it's really sort of setting the expectations and what the client can expect, and being transparent and upfront of what the process is like. And that's my point. Okay, so moving on. I know I spent a lot of time on that point. I don't know if you heard the passion coming through, but I feel that's something I feel very strongly about. Here's a kind of basically everything I just said in chart in a visual, um, and that I believe these slides are available after the fact. If you need sort of a chart, a visual aid as opposed to verbal, there you can review that. Yeah, and I also just add that when we're talking about ending the group, you know some likely group member behavior that you'll see is perhaps maybe sadness. I didn't mention that, but sadness, grief, and loss that might actually get triggered when you talk about ending a process, a 12-week process. Folks might be reminiscing about what it was like when they first walked in and had no idea of what to expect. And now that the group is ending, it's like, wow, I've learned so much, I've gained so much. This has been a really um, great thing for me. They might even be planning reunions. Um, they might want to keep in touch with each other. Um, so those are some of the things. And also, actually, I might add, as a provider, as a facilitator, you might be experiencing some of that as well. About the work that's coming to a close, you might have your own feelings around loss, etc. Okay, so some last key points about group work is that in creating the group, remember that in most cases you are the single common element among all group members, particularly in the very beginning. In shaping the group, your experience and behavior, as well as the expectations of group members, certainly guides the formation and group norms. In maintaining the group, your function can be a mediator. It's handling issues that might arise which threaten group cohesion. Your job really is to help the group function properly by showing confidence in your abilities, remaining calm, objective, and providing a safe environment. And some common tasks as a facilitator is certainly maintaining, like I said, maintaining a safe environment, serving as a group historian, particularly, I can never say that word, right? If you have an open group and folks are coming in and out, you might serve as a group historian. Uh, so to sort of get folks up to speed and collectively remember the history of like why the group was initially formed, what were some of the origins of the group formation, what are some of the experiences, what have been some of the successes and challenges, et cetera, et cetera. Um, we certainly help clients remain in the here and now by redirecting or bringing them back to the purpose of the group. And one of the things that I've seen, particularly when working with active or former um, drug users, is redirecting war stories of the past or what was lost or how overwhelming a task of looking at the future years from now is. Sort of redirecting clients to the here and now, as opposed to either looking at their lives while they were using in the past or what life might look like in the future should they continue to pick up. I mean, those are all very real uh, concerns, and not to minimize them, but it's about redirecting to the here and now. And certainly, if you can get group members to have I statements, where you're doing well. An example of an I statement is, I came to this group not wanting to be here, and now after having been here for a couple sessions, I really want to continue the work. If you have the luxury of having a co-facilitator, these are some of the more specific roles between a facilitator and a co-facilitator. So facilitator certainly is prepared. They might have the responsibility of handling any consent form, sign-in sheets, other data, other paperwork that might be necessary for the group. Certainly want to greet and welcome each participant, guide discussion, manage participation, thank participation. Certainly, things of those nature. And for the co-facilitator, um, it's helpful if you're not sitting side by side. You want to be in a place where you can see them non-verbally. And also, I think it just creates a weird group dynamic if the two leaders are sitting side by side. That might be very triggering for some folks. Um, and one of the facilitators can be in charge of nonverbal cues of the members. Certainly can handle room temperature or visitors at the door, interruptions, can help monitor time. And certainly we want the co-facilitator, I didn't add it in the slide, but to greet and introduce themselves to all the participants as well. Okay, so that's my first section of sort of the basics, nuts and bolts of the how-to group work. I'm going to pause here if there are any questions.
Okay, like we mentioned before, please submit your questions into the Q&A chat pod, which is just to the right of the presentation pod. If you have your presentation in full screen, you want to exit out of that now so you can see the question pod. Looks like we've just had a couple of technical questions, which I can address privately. And we'll just give a few more seconds if people want to get in questions now. Otherwise, feel free to submit them throughout the rest, and we'll address additional questions later.
Yeah, and I think also, as we take a break here real quick, if you've had any experience group working with native clients and some of maybe the best practices that you've encountered, this would be a great opportunity to type that into the box and share that with the rest of the group.
Okay, looks like we have a question about what the ideal size for a group might be.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what kind of group you're running and depending on, if there's a high demand and a wait list. I mean, ideally, I think the textbook is 8 to 12 members in a group, with on a standard 45, 50 hour long time duration for the group. 8 to 12 is kind of a standard, at least in my practice. Um, has it gone up to 13? Because of resources availability, and demand? Yes. I probably wouldn't say any more than that. Um, if you're a newer um, if you're newer to doing group work, if you're experienced and you feel comfortable, maybe one more. I mean, it's kind of a really gray area for me at least. Some people really hold fast to the 8 to 12 rule. Um, with regard to on the other opposite end of the spectrum, you certainly if people take time out of their. I always feel if people take time to come out to participate in group work, and they're the only person sitting in the room, and there's two facilitators, or there's one facilitator. I mean, that's not really group work. That's more individual counseling. Um, but if two people are there and you're there, I don't see any reason why. I mean, if it were me, I would go ahead and move forward. I wouldn't cancel. I don't think I've ever canceled any situation where there's been low turnout or low attendance because and again, sort of moving into the next section, if you're working with native clients and a native individual is sitting across from you and they're there for help and they walk away after an hour of having a really positive experience, guess what? The next session, you might have three more who show up, or that word of mouth really does help the situation. You might have, by the end of it, by the end of 12 weeks, you might have be turning people away because of the popularity. And I mean, I want to be clear about we're not trying to make group work popular. We're just trying to build trust and make this another option for folks with regard to interventions. Um, some this group work isn't for everybody, and if people do feel that this is an effective intervention, certainly we want to create awareness. That's my answer.
Great. We've got a few more questions here.
Okay.
Um, how do you transition your clients to move on after the group sessions end? What's next for them?
I that's I'll just answer that really quickly. That's, might be an individual conversation you have with them and ask, what are their plans for moving on and have a conversation around that. Um, I don't make that decision for them. For example, when I was running a psychoeducational group that was a closed group that ran for 12 weeks, and people really liked it and wanted to come back again. We ran it 4 times a year, wanted to come back for another round. We would say, okay. And if they wanted to come back a third time, we would say, well, why don't you sit this one out? This was kind of our informal policy as a department. Sit the third time out, take a break, see what's working for you, what's not, and then you can come back for a third session, at the end of the year. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful.
Good. Um, also, can you have a combination of a closed and an open group?
Um, I mean, other than when you have, let's say, a closed group that's for 12 weeks, and you might have it open for the first three sessions just because people might not be able to make the first one, people hear about it late and want to join during the second week, or maybe they are ambivalent about the group work and they're kind of dragging their feet around making up their mind, and by the third week they re-show up again. I mean, that's kind of how I've seen it done. Other folks might have different experiences, but that's generally my experience has been no, one or the other.
Okay. One more question for now. Are you planning to address mixed gender versus separate gender groups in the pros and cons?
I don't necessarily address that, but what I will say is that with regard to demographics, whether it is broken up by gender or whether it's broken up by particular problematic behaviors or whether it's broken up by other identifiers or identity or however you want to break it up, certainly we want folks that are in the group that have a um, common they want to address a common issue that they have or the common life experience that they're going through. Um, I have actually seen it be more effective in Native communities, broken up by gender, and um, I think that's a cultural um, issue, a cultural consideration rather. So I don't really get into that much, but I mean I think that's an excellent point. Is that um, that's a conversation you might have with the community you're serving. Is it disrespectful to have men and women in one room talking about their personal, intimate life situations? I think most of us would say, yeah, that might feel a little odd discussing, sexuality or drug use in front of women. We might break it up by gender. So I think, thank you for bringing that up. Whoever that was, I didn't get the name. I think it was, anyway, I missed the name, but thank you for bringing that point up.
Great. I think that is all the questions we have for now. So yeah, please continue to submit questions throughout, and we will have time for more at the end.
Okay, so let's get to it. Look, this is the part two of the section, and that's looking at group work with Native folks who identify as Native. And by Native, I mean folks who identify as American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, First Nations, other indigenous folks of this continent, rather, in this continent. So looking at communication styles, I think is a great starting point. And that just to realize that native communication styles and communication styles in general can be very different in Indian country, um, depending on where you're from, how you're raised, the community, location, geographics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, languages, if English is your first or second language, communication can be wide and vast. Differences can be wide and vast, and it certainly cannot be generalized. However, I think it is an important concept to discuss um, when working to provide our ability to work with Native folks. Um, so, for some Native nations and tribes and community, first off, I have the understanding that if a Native person looks away, that this might be a sign of respect, and it shouldn't be interpreted as a sign of disrespect. And I should also point out too that me being a Native person, I have to be mindful of these things as well because of the vast diversity and the fact that we can't generalize um, these cultural considerations um, with any given community that we work with. Um, just in general statement, Native people are sometimes taught that listening rather than speaking immediately is more important. In addition to personal information about oneself and one's family is not always easily shared. These are things just to be mindful of, and these are cultural considerations. Another one might be silence or minimal sharing should not be interpreted as disinterest or an indication that anything is wrong. Where English is the client's second language, the speech may be thoughtful or slower. And just to be mindful of that some Native people, particularly elders in my experience, may believe that talking about a certain topic or taboo subject will it to come true. I come from the HIV/AIDS arena, and that was a challenge that we would come across every so often. Was that folks didn't want community presentations brought to their reservation, community awareness presentations, because they thought by talking about it was going to make it come into their community. So we had to be mindful of that. And looking at culture and other cultural considerations, this is what I mean by the diversity. It's inclusive of Native American, American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiian, First Nations, other indigenous folks, and even in the United States alone, with the diversity of 562 federally recognized tribes, that doesn't include state recognized tribes and unrecognized tribes in the United States, the lower 48, as well as 223 tribal communities in Alaska and within the within Hawaiian Islands. So I kind of want to point out a little bit of contrast here with regard to the clinical experience, and this is relevant to group work. And by the clinical experience, I'm referring to the biopsychosocial and sometimes spiritual experience, which builds upon and fosters positive therapeutic relationships. And the way we do that certainly is through building trust. And when we do that, it increases the likelihood of treatment plan adherence. And once we have all this kind of moving forward, we reduce the likelihood that folks are going to drop out of treatment. It certainly keeps folks coming back for more. Um, and certainly, the biopsychosocial experience reaffirms the clients as experts in their own health, mental health, behavior, spiritual experiences. And in doing so, when we affirm them as experts, we help clients make positive changes in their life, certainly through increasing motivation. So, in contrast, I kind of wanted to point out, how does this fit with the native worldviews? Most often as providers, it requires a shift in our delivery of the services we provide. And we, need to ask ourselves, how do we work from a culturally relevant perspective? First off, and this is something that I do, is take into account the importance of spirituality. It's certainly often part of cultural teachings, whether that's learned or ingrained within the community. This may be exemplified when someone dies or someone gives birth or during puberty ceremonies. And we all know that spirituality is part of a holistic approach. So I encourage you all to not minimize this when working with Native folks. And that can be demonstrated through an appreciating respect for nature, environment, and surroundings. And the client's appreciation and respect for our bodies, health, bodies, mind, and our own connection to the past. In my experience, taboo subjects can include, and I have taboo in quotes, because I think there's a perception that if you talk about sex, that there's a taboo around talking about sex, in my experience. And I don't entirely think that's true. I just think that there's a time and a place to have those conversations. And perhaps maybe having that conversation in a group setting is not it's not culturally appropriate. So, some taboo subjects which affect all of our clients might be HIV or other sexually transmitted infection, as opposed to discussing diabetes, um, sexual behaviors, and things that place people at risk, particularly for those who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. Certainly, drug use is a very intimate and private behavior for some. And there might be some general issues of modesty and privacy, cross-gender communication, which the participant brought up around genders and groups. Yeah, that actually might be a real issue, and you might not need to have everybody in one room, but actually run two separate groups, one for those who identify as female and one for those who identify as male, and perhaps maybe even a third group for those who, um, you know, maybe gender is not an issue for them, or folks who might be intersex or not identify with either one of those genders. And to keep in mind, modesty is not necessarily always about shyness, but about respect, respecting who else is in the room, respecting you as a facilitator provider, um, that someone withholding private information might be respect for you. And certainly there are other subjects that might be construed as taboo. Um, and, this might be relevant for folks who are thinking about starting groups or who are currently running groups right now or beginning to start running groups, is looking at some of the native specific cultural risk factors. I mentioned the lack of confidentiality, um, and that might not have anything to do with the group or the agency that you were working with, but it might be a historical memory of someone maybe in their family or maybe that happened to them, the client, when working with a different agency where their confidentiality was compromised, maybe because they knew somebody who worked at the facility, or maybe because they had a family member who went there and their information was gossiped about behind them. And that's a real consideration, and it's something that I think to effectively work with Native people, you have to constantly reassure them um, that you honor their confidentiality or you uphold their confidentiality, and these are the practices that you do to the best of your ability, and you might detail them out. Some other risk factors include the lack of social services, particularly in rural and reservation communities, and by that I mean culturally appropriate services. Um, it could be because of funding. It just be because of stigma. It might be just because someone had a really amazing, great idea in a small community, and they had the funding to do it, and no one showed up. I mean, for whatever reason, there might be a lack of services that folks uh, can get uh, in order to get the help that folks need. Um, and limited access to comprehensive health care. circular migration, moving from back and forth between rural and urban communities, and certainly racism and homophobia. What I want to point out is that you as a provider have the opportunity to provide culturally respectful, meaningful mental health services. And I've read it in the research, I've read it in the literature, and I've had people tell me anecdotally that they want native centric or culturally sensitive mental health services but don't know where to get them. So this is where you all have an opportunity to fill the void. In addition to, you have the absolute, almost amazing ability to know and understand current trends and needs. And that's a key role in moving our professional work forward. I talked about confidentiality in the interest of time. I'm not going to belabor the subject, but again, it's just critical that we maintain the highest level of confidentiality if we are serious about improving the quality of life for all people. Um, you know, whenever I'm looking with regard to engagement, whenever I'm in a new room with folks, native folks, and I don't have any history with them, I don't even know them, I don't know their families, I don't know where they're from, certainly introductions are key. And it might take a whole entire session just to get through introductions in the entire room. Um, through that, we certainly want to reaffirm them as experts in their own experience. And spirituality might come into play with an opening or closing prayer. Now, I encourage you to consider doing this if you're not. Um, for me, it's something that I always do. I'm not saying that everybody needs to do this. And I'm not particularly always excited to lead the prayer. So, but I find that, and I feel like it's something that is important to do. So, if I'm not feeling up for it, I might ask somebody in the group to do it if they feel comfortable. Some people really want to do it and feel honored doing that, and I respect that, and I encourage them to do that, to be the prayer leader in the group. Um, if no one is interested, I might individually ask, maybe perhaps before the group starts, if the elder might like to lead us in a prayer. I've had to do it myself. I don't mind doing it, but it's not something I feel entirely comfortable doing. But I'll do it. Um, you know, the it's obviously this is very subjective um, issue, but I might just say if you're not doing it, you might consider how you might integrate this into to ways of engaging Native folks into the group work process. I This is one of the hardest things for me to do, and that's the 10-second rule, and I have to be mindful of this, especially for elders, and that is when you ask a question, whether it's open or closed, to wait to count 10 seconds in your head. And all that dead silence that's going on in your head, at least for me, is anxiety inducing. But what you're doing is creating space for people to think of a thoughtful response, to give people time to process how they might word or phrase what they're going to say. And I think it's culturally relevant, particularly when working with Native clients. Certainly, you might want to have a ready to go referral list of local Native organizations. And one that actually came up in a research project I was working on was for non-Native providers to actually show up at other Native events in the community. And that engagement is a two-way street. So, if you hear of a local event going, community event, and it's open to everybody, you might drop on by and just check it out. And, I believe the comment in this research project I was working on went something like this. It was like, we make effort to go into their spaces, but they don't make any effort to come into ours. Meaning if there's a community potluck or powwow or cultural event, that non-native providers don't show up to those. And so just being mindful of this two-way street engagement building. If you have the ability to provide snacks and at, at water at minimum, and incentives if that's part of your program design. I always say, whether or not the person's there showing up for a gas card or there because they want to create change in their life, for me, it doesn't matter as long as they're there and showing up. I have the opportunity to build that trust with them. Okay, so I realize that time is an issue here, so I'm going to move a little faster. Certainly, building authentic relationship with gatekeepers. Um, is something to be mindful of. It certainly helps you considering. Well, one thing I'll say about gatekeepers is that it can help folks come in the door, but consider that relationship on the long for the long term, and that you're not just using somebody to get buy-in in the community. That's a real relationship, and that's a relationship you should consider once after your group is finished. And that might take some time. And just be mindful that there's a great deal of mistrust. There might be a great deal of mistrust between native and non-native providers. Here's a way we can address that: is to build that relationship, that authentic, meaningful relationship, provider to provider, community member to community member, between you and somebody in a community that you're not familiar with. We want to strive for building relationship with community leaders. Again, going back to that word of mouth, community leaders have great influence and great can have a far-reaching net in terms of who might be best for the group work that you're trying to implement. As always, be respectful of local customs, traditions, tribal history. Um, Certainly, getting local organizational support. I have done this myself in frustration that emails and phone calls certainly did not work for me. But what did work was actually going over to the organization and meeting face to face and shooting the breeze for however long it took, and then getting around to why I was there and seeing if they'd be interested to support this group that's going to be starting up in a couple of weeks, and really making that personal connection. I think, in my experience, has been the only way I've gotten support from local organizations. Building relationship with traditional healers. We talked about aftercare. What do folks do once the group's ending? And traditional healing might be the only option for folks, and might be the one option that gets folks to maintain their healthy behaviors. And so, having that one-on-one relationship with local healers um, certainly might be helpful for you and the group work that you're trying to do. Ultimately, it's going to be helpful for the individual who decides that that is the avenue that they want to take towards wellness. Um, Same goes with tribal health departments. With any public health agency, being respectful, having patience, certainly recording names, so that you can keep track of who you talk to. We know that Native people respond favorably to Native imagery, as you can see on this slide. Um, when we're developing any brochures or flyers or outreach material, or even content material, we want to be respectful of the local Native culture in that community. So, for example, if I was designing a flyer for an upcoming group in Phoenix, I don't know if I necessarily would jump to wanting to do powwow art on that flyer, because that isn't a local tradition necessarily. That might work better in other parts of the country, like in the plains, or Montana, Wyoming, or in Oklahoma. I might look at what the local tribe's history and what maybe some of their particular art and culture, and adapt the flyer to reflect that. If nothing else, if you have nothing else, certainly you know, any native imagery is better than none. But that's just a little tip from me to you. Certainly, we know that affirming clients' cultural needs is great practice, and getting them involved in other activities, like, for example, just trying to so, for example, maybe there's a beadworking group, or participating in a shawl making circle, or maybe there's an opportunity to learn traditional cooking. I mean, those are great activities to get folks involved with, in addition to the work that you're trying to do. It's a great way to build therapeutic relationships, and if you're participating in those other groups too as a community member, you're taking the professional out of the professional and creating more of the personal, and ultimately, I think that leads to stronger, trusting relationships. And lastly, reminding clients, and this kind of goes back to uh, during the forming stage of group work, reminding clients of native-specific cultural strengths, which builds motivation. It can certainly build courage, and certainly help in the healing process. And I think personally, Native clients don't hear this info very often. However, I believe Native people know these strengths because they are demonstrated in our stories, among our elders, and through ceremonies, and sometimes it just needs to be pointed out. And those strengths are that Native people inherently are survivors. that there's a connection to our ancestors, that Native people are resilient, that they are adaptable, that there's an appreciation and honor of the community in which they're from, certainly an appreciation for spirituality and connection to the past, that we honor our family, our elders, and our youth. These are all strengths that you can remind folks of, that we are taking a holistic approach, that we address the mind, the body, the spirit, and emotional sides of folks, um, looking at cultural pride and being proud of who you are and where you come from, um, honoring folks that speak their traditional languages, um, honoring the local food and traditional foods that people know, appreciation and honoring the land, and certainly ceremonies and being respectful of um, those strengths. So I want to thank you very much. I know I kind of was rushing there at the end, but I really want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with me this morning/afternoon. And if there's any questions or any feedback or comments, or maybe you have some um, stories you want to share, please feel free to reach out to me. You have my email. And I wish you well. And certainly, please reach out to me or Kate. The ATC is a great uh, contact for resources. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Matt, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and your personal experience. Um, and yeah, please submit your questions. We'll have a few minutes here for you to submit them, so try to get them in quickly before we close out of the webinar. Someone asked about the slide presentations. I will be emailing handouts of the slides to everyone who attended. They're also available for download in the files pod in the webinar screen on the lower left-hand corner. But yeah, they will be included in the email as well. While we wait for additional questions to come in, I will just remind people, please stay on after the webinar is over, and you should be linked to our survey. If not, I will include a link in the email follow-up that you'll receive as well. Looking forward to the next couple of months in our essential substance abuse skills and our behavioral health webinar series. Like I mentioned, we have on August 6th, we're actually going to have Dr. Clyde McCoy present on the real All-Americans. And then on August 20 for our essential substance abuse skills, we'll have basic counseling skills with Beth Boyd. Um, yeah, and like Matt said, we just want to thank you so much for joining us. I'll go back to his slides so you can see his contact information in case you'd like to get in touch with him. Looks like we do have a question. Do you have any comment you can make regarding having group members sit on chairs or sitting on the floor? Do you have any experience with that?
Um, well, I didn't talk about age or age groups, but I think, maybe for younger kids, if they like to sit on the floor, then that means that I have to sit on the floor, which I'm not exactly a fan of, but I will do for the sake of group cohesion and group work. Um, Typically, though, I generally use chairs. I think most people are comfortable, adults are most comfortable sitting on chairs, and we want to in addition to creating a safe environment where people can feel free to disclose and have an open dialogue and have a conversation. Um, we want to create a comfortable environment as well. So chairs and that brings up maybe water or snacks or having easy directions to the restroom if people need to use the restroom. Anything to make the environment welcoming, inviting, comfortable, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Doesn't look like we have any more questions at this time, but please feel free to either respond to my follow-up email or get in touch with Matt at his email on the slide if you have any more questions about today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us again. And Matt, if you have any final thoughts, otherwise I will go ahead and close this out.
No, thank you, and I wish you all luck.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah, and we will look forward